For all you politics fans out there, here's a bonus bit that would have ended up on the cutting room floor. An interview that I did, or a discussion perhaps I did, with Alastair Ramsay about the Legislative Council. An agenda bonus.
Before I go too far, I should declare an interest as someone who stood for LegCo a few years ago and flopped spectacularly. So I don't want anything that I say to be seem as sour grapes or any reflection on the people who were successful, because they've been pretty useful, most of them. The purpose, I think we've lost sight of it because of the way that the role has changed over the years, and people forget that at one point the Legislative Council was the seat of power. It was the seat of the executive around the governor, who was the chief executive. LegCo was made up of Crown appointments, and they were the dominant chamber, and the House of Keys was very much the poor relation. And now it's gone the other way, leaving the Legislative Council looking semi-redundant, really. So there are mixed views about what it's for.
Why do we actually need to have all these different separate parts to Tynwald?
Well, there's the kind of history aspect, but I think it's useful to have a second chamber as a backstop, just with that ability. It's like a safety net, really. When you've got a fairly small and sometimes very inexperienced primary chamber, why not have people standing behind them to just raise issues, say, did you really mean to do that? And at most they can just pause things for a while. The other thing is that increasingly the House of Keys is dominated very heavily by the executive. So there's a role there for LegCo on the scrutiny side to counterbalance that very heavy dominance of the government.
And is it doing that?
Not visibly, no. I think because there's this lack of clarity about what it's there for, some of the members see themselves primarily as scrutineers, but there's also this people who get involved in kind of government managerial roles. You certainly don't hear a lot of scrutinising questions in public from MLCs. You do occasionally, and you see some scrutiny work led by them. But I think we could do with quite a bit more and a greater focus on that scrutiny. And I think one of the reasons why they don't like to ask awkward questions is that they have been made to feel like they're not a legitimate body, and that if they make a lot of noise, well, nobody voted for you, shut up, sort of thing.
Former Chief Minister Howard Quayle made is reportedly made various sweeping comments about some of the members of the Legislative Council who were hauled into his office and told in no uncertain terms that their role was to support the government, or words to that effect. And no doubt if Howard is listening, he'll be saying, no, it wasn't quite like that. But that's the perception, certainly.
That is the perception, and if it was true, it was quite an extraordinary episode, given that they'd just elected in a large number of women in the interests of diversity, and the women were then told off for causing trouble. But that's possibly a misrepresentation of what actually happened. I think because people want to be constructive, they're public-spirited people, they want to be positive, they want to help. And people see that as, getting involved in activity, being busy, helping on departments, helping with committees and so on. And scrutiny itself is not perceived as a form of support, but actually it is, because you're helping with the quality of decisions, quality of information and so on. So I think we really need to refocus on what LegCo's there for, and make it primarily about scrutiny, that detachment and that perspective from what's going on down in the House of Keys.
Almost all the members are members of government as well as Parliament, and a lot of people who have no interest in politics confuse the two. It is quite an important distinction, and all attempts so far at trying to reform things on the island so that we have less or fewer members actually as part of government seem to have fallen by the wayside.
I think it's almost seen as not relevant to the Isle of Man. I remember the late great Victor Neal, when I was talking to him about this. He said, well, down in the Westminster they got time for that fancy business, but we haven't got, we work differently up here. And I think this is the root of a lot of the issues, where there's a perceived lack of challenge, a perceived lack of criticism, because everyone becomes absorbed in one way or another with the kind of ruling government. And at a stretch, you could almost say that each administration becomes a form of one-party state.
And it's all, well, having been there and been part of this bubble, you lose sight of the reality as perceived by everybody else outside of the government bubble, don't you? Because you're living and breathing a particular policy and a particular idea, and you're, as ever with government, nothing ever happens quickly. It takes a long time to develop, and it may well be that the issue that you're trying to resolve in the public's mind has moved quite dramatically in a different direction, but you're still doggedly pursuing this particular policy because everyone around you is part of the government team and all pulling together and
that's what MLCs could do more of, is actually pull the debate back to how it might be seen by members of the public, the sorts of questions that the public would want to know. And that could just be, where are we up to with that policy that is in your plan? Give us an update. Now, I know they get those updates in briefings, and I'm not going to get too preoccupied with that. That's one of my hobby horses, but that's the kind of information that should be out there in public, and MLCs could help draw that out. It doesn't have to be a question that someone's got onto you about some kind of local issue. It could be just, it gives the ministers then an opportunity to give the public an update.
Something else which is quite new, I think, in terms of Legislative Council is members of LegCo from a particular area of the island being classed as southern members, northern members, whatever it may be. That really is an extraordinary position to be in, because Legislative Council, because they don't have any constituency, they effectively are there to represent the whole island. Are there any dangers in this idea of having LegCo members attached to particular areas of the island?
Yes, I would have thought so. I mean, it is an extraordinary development. I wouldn't have thought it was any part of an MLC's role to kind of back their constituency and work as a kind of, support, like a tag team with the MHKs for the area. But maybe this is how things evolve. But again, it raises the question of what are they meant to be doing there? I would have thought they were there on a national basis and for the general public interest, and that actually getting too involved in constituency issues could undermine that focus on the general public interest.
Because, of course, they are national politicians, aren't they? And I think sometimes this is forgotten, possibly even by members of Legislative Council, that actually they are national politicians. And any politician worth their salt should be engaging with the public. They should be making clear their views. They should be talking to the media. They should speak in whatever parliamentary debates that they happen to be involved with. But some members just don't seem to get that at all.
And I think that's a danger for members generally, is that the people want to be busy, they want to be supportive and constructive, and then their job becomes focusing on the work that they have been given to do. But there's a space where they need to use their own initiative, ask their own questions, and just challenge, and say, I don't understand this. Explain it to me better.
Because there's no such thing as a silly question in politics. You need to be prepared to ask silly questions. Again, I had a discussion not too many weeks ago about political egos, and sometimes those egos get in the way of asking the silly questions, don't they?
Yeah, and of course that's one of the reasons why the members like to have private briefings, because they can ask stupid questions, or what they think are stupid questions, without the embarrassment of the public hearing them. But actually the stupid questions are often the best ones, and they're the ones that the public would want to ask, and the answers are what the public want to hear.
Okay, well, let's have a little look then at the whole Legislative Council election process.
Yes.
I mean, if you use your example, your candidacy, how did all that happen?
Well, yes, I came into it quite late. It was one of these kind of rash decisions that, well, I'm going to go for it, get out of your comfort zone sort of thing. And what I found was that the wise people had got in there very early on and had been canvassing for nominations very early on, so that by the time I and others got into the field, it was quite a busy field, as I remember. A lot of the members, the MHKs, were already committed to other people. So I struggled to get the nominations. I was grateful for the ones that I eventually got. But it struck me that it was as a form of job recruitment, it was rather odd, in that the interviewing panel were committed to some candidates before they knew the full range of candidates available. Now that makes it sound like, I'm just a bit bitter and what have you. And as I said before, the people who did get in were very good, so I'm not criticising that particular outcome. But I think it's a strange system where people have decided very early on that they are going to back, A, B and C, without knowing that there are other people who might be better coming along later.
Yes, I mean, it seems an odd thing to commit yourself before you know the full
I mean,
field.
And what you could say is that, by agreeing to nominate or be a supporter of someone, you're not necessarily bound to vote for them, but I think you probably are. Yeah. And in that particular case, the House had clearly agreed amongst themselves very early on that they were going to take the opportunity to put a lot of women in the interest of diversity. And actually some of those people have subsequently become very successful members of the House of Keys. So that was a good outcome. But I think the whole system needs reviewing, because if LegCo are the scrutineers of the Keys, then should the Keys be appointing their own scrutineers?
It's a great way of proceeding if you happen to be in the Keys, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there needs to be some kind of detachment somehow or other, short of public election of LegCo, because if the public voted for LegCo, you would get that clash of public mandates. And the second chamber could then claim to have a stronger mandate than the first, and that could be a recipe for stalemate. But Lord Lisvane, God bless him, one of the things he recommended was a nominations commission, which would take in applications for LegCo candidates, scrutinise them against or assess them against a clear job description, and then they would propose those to be voted on by the Keys. So that would achieve a degree of separation there. But interestingly, the Keys just didn't go for that.
Yes, there was an awful lot. In fact, very little, I think, in Lisvane that didn't end up on a dusty
I mean,
shelf.
he also reverting to this issue about most members of the Parliament also being involved with the executive. That struck him as extraordinary. I mean, he remarked on that and said, really, you need to have fewer parliamentarians involved in departments. And even though there's no longer a financial penalty for staying out of departments, most members, because they want to be busy and they want to work hard and be seen to be working, are still involved in departments.
The other thing, of course, which has changed in recent LegCo elections is members of the Keys have to put their money where their mouth is, in as much as it's a public vote now.
Yes.
Whereas in the past, members could promise votes to every single candidate, and then, of course, do the dirty deed in the secrecy of.
But it used to be a real pantomime, if you recall. You know, they could never achieve a clear result, and it would go on forever, I think.
Yes, and there's always been a feeling that the members, any elected member to LegCo, should command at least 13 votes in the Keys, which effectively is the majority of members. But again, does that reflect society? You know, if you looked at it from the two-party systems that we see across the water, particularly in the UK, you could have a situation where one party had 60% of the vote, the other had 40% of the vote, which meant that if we had mirrored that in the island, every single LegCo member would be from the party that had that 60%. So you then don't get the diversity of opinion, perhaps in the same way. But of course, politics on the island isn't like that.
No, it's nowhere near so rational, is it really? But the other issue, of course, is this question about whether people who have been unsuccessful in Keys elections should subsequently stand for and be elected for Legislative Council. And there is this view that, you know, the public have rejected you, therefore you have no place in Parliament at all. And I think that's a little bit overstated. I think if you have been rejected in terms of having got, you know, like 3 votes, then I think the public have rejected you. If you've come second in a Keys election with a few hundred votes in support, then actually you've got more public endorsement than somebody who just walks straight in from civilian life, so to speak.
It's certainly an unpopular thing, though. There's only 2 members I can think of, and that was Claire Christian, the original Claire Christian, who went on to become president of Tynwald, and of course Paul Crane. I can't think of any others, other members who have lost out at the Keys election and then got elected in. So it's obviously not something that Keys members are keen to do.
But some runners-up in some Keys constituencies will have got more votes than people who succeeded in other constituencies. So it's quite hard to judge. And I do think the old idea of actually having members being MHKs elevated straight up to Legislative Council, it went out of fashion, but I think there is something to be said for having some genuine elder statesmen there who remember where the bodies are buried, who remembered what failed 15, 20 years ago. And that corporate memory, which is so lacking now, both amongst the politicians and indeed the officers, is quite valuable, because otherwise you get this kind of year zero mentality, you know, where people are reinventing the wheel and how hard can it be, and, you know, things are different now. And I'm a bit sceptical about that.
Yes, and scepticism is a good thing, but equally, I remember, and I've apologies to listeners, you've heard this one before, but a very experienced member of the Dáil came over to the island and was speaking to me, and I was talking about potential constitutional reform, and said, but I need some more experience before I do that. And he immediately said, no, you don't need the experience. That once you get the experience, you become so familiar that you don't you resist change rather than promote it. And potentially having a relatively naive Keys and LegCo allows for some of these things to happen.
Oh, definitely. Without the baggage, you can sometimes see things more clearly. But equally, it doesn't do any harm to have a couple of kind of Statler and Waldorf figures, in the corner, saying, well, this will never, or like Private Fraser from Dad's Army, it'll never work. No, you need that. You need a balance, really, of experience, and then that diversity of people from different backgrounds, and getting that balance right is part of the challenge.
Do you think any members of the Keys might have a go at this?
Gosh, I hadn't really thought about this current lot. As you say, they would make themselves unpopular if it's seen as certainly kind of mid-term, taking the escape hatch to evade the judgment of the populace is it doesn't look good, does it?
And of course, one member who famously did this and then stood back and fought and got re-elected was Tim Krukell.
Yeah.
And I suppose there's him and Ewan Watterson are the more experienced Keys members. I think it's unheard of to think that the Speaker would step down and go for LegCo. But Tim Krukell, I suppose, is the only other experienced member left in Keys.
Whether he would go back up again, that would start to look a bit strange, wouldn't it, if he was to do that? I doubt that he will be thinking of that.
Yeah, there have been members in the past that have done. I think was it Leonard Singer? Certainly Dominic Delaney, I think, might have done it. Had a bit of a yo-yo thing with Keys and LegCo. Yeah. So we await with interest who all the candidates are going to be, and at least who's going to be successful. It's hard, as I think we've discussed. It's hard to really assess and understand what Keys are looking for. And indeed, I've asked a number of the candidates we know of, and their view is that there's at least three different threads that you get from the Keys members. Some Keys members are absolutely adamant that you shouldn't be serving in government. Other Keys members are absolutely adamant that you should. And then there's a third camp which, well, you can, but
But know your place. That's the thing.
Yeah. And indeed, I have heard from some Keys members who say, actually, we really do need to have the challenge. We're having it far too easy. Indeed, I'm told ministers are giving pep talks to the members to say that you need to be better at scrutinising us. You're giving us far too easy a ride, which is a bit of a dangerous, careful what you wish for.
Absolutely,
yeah. Yes, we're probably missing the likes of Peter Carron or someone like that who was a constant thorn in the side of government.
They were the grit in the underpants. I think it's uncomfortable, but I think necessary.
Well, how could we advance on that thought? Alastair, thank you very much.
Cheers.
That was Alastair Ramsay and myself mulling over the whole subject of Legislative Council. What's it for? Is there any future in it? And all kinds of other questions. For now, though, I'm Phil Gorn, Gurra Mayus and Geistach Rum. Thanks for listening.